Welcome to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. Today, I'm joined by Louis Bezich. He's a healthcare executive, men's health advocate, and author of Saving Men from Themselves. After decades working in leadership and a lifetime of lessons from divorce, single parenthood, and reinvention, Louis now helps men over 50 rediscover purpose, connection, and vitality. So welcome to you, Louis.
Thank you, Philip. Glad to be here.
So let's start with your lived experience. I mean, you work around men's health and motivation, but I understand some of that comes from lived experience, not just research. Can we start with your own story then? You know, what happened in your life when you first realised, for example, you needed to take charge of your health and some of the other things that you've experienced?
Well, Philip, you're right. My advocacy for men's health really evolved over a number of years, but it all started pretty much in my 30s when I became a single dad. I was in a marriage that, for a number of reasons, was heading south, and I found myself with my two sons, a seventh grader and a second grader, under my roof, and all the requisite responsibilities: putting dinner on the table, packing lunches, doctor's appointments, doing laundry, in addition, of course, to my day job that I had. And it was it was a challenging situation, but one where I found a motivation to live healthy in the eyes of those two boys, because I really wanted to be there for them. And I sort of just intuitively knew that taking care of my own health so I could be there for them was very important. So that sort of set me on my path. And then ultimately, Philip, when the boys, after a number of years, and the boys graduated from what we call high school and went off to lives of their own in university, I realized that what had started as a coping mechanism, right? Because the pressure of all my household chores, my professional career, et cetera, a lot of what I did in terms of exercise and then ultimately diet was sort of a coping mechanism to get me through and, kept me there for the boys. That had transitioned into a passion. I really enjoyed, working out. I attended to my own personal health. I made sure to get an annual physical, had better dietary practices as time went on. And so what started, as I said, as a coping mechanism became a passion. And then what really turned that passion into advocacy is when, about 15 years ago, I found myself in an executive position in a very large healthcare organization. And I learned more about the health of men of my generation at that 50 and older, and how poor their health was. And then even more generally speaking, how poor the health of Americans was. In America, we spend more money on healthcare than any other industrialized country in the world by far. It's not close. It's like here, America's here, and then number two is like in the middle. But yet the health of Americans is merely middle of the pack when it comes to our health. So we're spending all this money, but not really getting value from that. And that kind of had me scratch my head to figure out, like, what's wrong with this equation, right? And come to find out that it's our own lifestyle that very much influences our health outcomes. And that, that set me on this advocacy, because, I hated to see the more I worked out, the more I stuck with my healthy lifestyle, the better I felt, right? And it helped me stay competitive professionally. It helped me, continue my relationship with my children. I went through a couple of divorces, as you pointed out, along the way, and helped me ultimately find the love of my life, which I'm still with now, some 17 years later. So this mindset that, when a guy hits 50, that it's just all downhill and it's not worth it, I think is ridiculous. And that's really at the core of my advocacy.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because men, especially perhaps when they've got children, in their 40s, 50s, got work pressures, that's almost the antithesis of you thinking, well, I'm going to look after myself, I'm going to look after my health, because you have time pressures as well as everything else. And it's very easy, isn't it, to live life just kind of coping, and getting into a gym or eating healthily or not drinking too much. That's kind of furthest from your mind. You're just trying to get through the day. So how do you kind of motivate guys, I guess, that sort of age with those sorts of external pressures, how do you create a kind of shift in the way that men look after themselves?
Well, it all starts, Philip, with finding that motivation and sustaining that motivation. And what all of the science shows us is that it starts with our relationships. When we talk about healthy behavior, it's like, all right, let me go get a gym membership. Let me pick a diet. Jump right to sort of that dimension of things. But what I advocate for in my book is, it comes from the science that I've researched, and that is that you need to have purpose. You need to have a strong motivators and inspiration, because it's not easy. It's not easy to stick with your physical workout. Not easy to stay with a strict diet until you sort of get to the mountain, which we can talk about later, and you really enjoy it. But getting there is difficult. So you need the motivation. And, so I talk to men, and I speak a lot in the book about developing those relationships. And for most men, it's their spouse or significant other, whatever. But you can also find that, again, in your children, your grandchildren, your occupation. Some men like to volunteer. Inspiration can be found in all sorts of places, but it gives you that purpose. And if you want to follow through on that stuff, if you want to, dance at your granddaughter's or your daughter's wedding, and you want to be healthy enough, that's the common denominator. Men, the stereotype is that we are providers and protectors, right, Philip? As men, that's what we do. But when it comes to the most fundamental aspect of being there as a provider and protector, our own health, we fail miserably. I mean, men have a shorter lifespan than women. We have more chronic disease. Suicide is a big factor. It's much higher in men than women. So we've got a lot of issues there. And so it starts with that. And there's other tactics we can talk about as well.
Many men listening to this, they know that. They know they need to eat healthy, work out. Doesn't have to be in a gym. Perhaps lead a more healthy life, especially if they've got dependents and people rely on them. But it's all very well thinking that, but it's quite another thing actually putting it into practice. And you talked about finding your motivation then. What's a kind of really easy step? Because I think a lot of times it's about just starting, isn't it? What's an easy step someone listening to this could take, today, just to start them on a...
Well, yeah, you're right. Once you have the motivation, you got to then turn that into habits, routines, and rituals, right? Because that's what you want to do to sustain those behaviors. So, like in my case, I figured out early in my career, because I used to go to a lot of night meetings and things of that nature as part of what I did for a living. So I couldn't like come home and then work out or something like that. So I became a morning person. Right? Not just out of necessity. So, I mean, the practical issue of looking at your schedule, looking at your life, and when can you find time? And you must find time because you must make healthy behavior a priority in your life. But for me, it was the morning. And I found that getting up early and developing a ritual where I would, have a cup of coffee and catch up on the overnight news and look at my calendar for the coming day, and sort of like very quiet time in the house. By this time the children are gone. It's just my wife and I. And so I've got this quiet time before I go to the gym. And I find that it's sort of my form of meditation. I don't do traditional meditation, which is a great thing for a lot of people, but I have my quiet time, and that, has developed into a ritual for me. And so I have my quiet time. I get to the gym, I do my workouts. And so by the time I get to the office in the morning, I'm ready to go. So whatever, think about your lifestyle, think about your demands on your life, but find a time to do it and see, because it's all about, the ritual. Because once you get into that, when you miss, look, sometimes stuff happens in life, right? And we can't sustain our schedule for the day, but, you really miss it in effect. And that's where I call it, get to the top of the mountain of healthy behavior, where when you miss a day, or you, don't adhere to your dietary practices like you should, you don't like that. You feel uncomfortable and you want to get back to the routine. So, that's sort of what, how to get things started, figure out a routine. And also, by the way, if plan A works, it's okay. We've got plan B, C, and D. then we can try, right? We don't always get it right on the first try.
What do you think makes men kind of resistant to that? If it's not a silly question, what makes, because they know they need to do it, but what are those causes of resistance?
Well, that now touches on, masculinity and masculine norms, right? And that applies more so on, what we haven't mentioned is, one of the most fundamental things is forget about diet and exercise. See a doctor at least once a year, right? Get an annual physical, get a checkup, right? But our masculine norms say, oh, no, we're good. Unless unless my chest is pounding in extreme pain, then I'm good. It'll just go away. Right. And by the way, that holds for the Brits as well as the Americans. There's plenty of literature that says, I'm fine. I'm fine. So we need to overcome that. We need to take care of ourselves. Here in America, and I think it's the same way with the Brits with soccer. Like we watch our football, American football players every week, and they, when it comes to their health, they are pampered with so many doctors and, excuse me, physical therapists and everything else. And we worship them, right? But what for some reason it's not masculine, or it's a sign of weakness if we want to go to the doctor. So that's, overcoming those masculine norms is a big factor.
They're quite kind of embedded, aren't they? Especially if you're in your 50s or older, you grew up in a time when it wasn't the thing to appear vulnerable or have emotions, really, other than perhaps, anger, extreme happiness. So that they're hardwired. How do you start to, well, it's two questions. One, how do you start to kind of unfreeze your own, approach to how you're feeling and becoming more open to going to see the doctor, for example? And then the second part of that question is, how do we do that at a broader level, at a macro level?
Sure. I think that men of my era, the ones that are 50 and older, number one, that we do have the ability to change and to kind of see the light in terms of healthy behaviors and doing things like getting to the doctor at least once a year for an annual physical, and recognizing that our mental health is a legitimate health concern, just like a broken arm would be, whatever. And then even more so, I think that what's so important and a challenge I always throw out to my men as part of what I call a tough love approach is that we need to help influence the next generation of young men who are being challenged by this conflict between, the literature suggests that, and the science suggests that younger men are a little bit more open to mental health care and understanding that depression is a legitimate concern. But that's bumping up against, the toxic masculinity and some other cultural trends that are pushing the traditional male stereotype that, seeing a physician, or talking about depression or mental health is a sign of weakness. And I think that's an incredibly important challenge. Cultural norms have such a huge influence on our behavior, right? And that's why we need to pay attention to that stuff. So, that's why I preach about, communication and open dialogue about this, because that's the only way, that we get to the acknowledgement that mental health concerns and things like depression are a normal part of what's called being human, right? And that's why, as I've referred to before, I try to find examples of, the most masculine among us, so to speak. The in our country, the NFL football players, and for example, a fellow named Lane Johnson, who was an offensive tackle here for the Philadelphia Eagles, as somebody who came forward with depression a couple years ago and was embraced by his teammates for the courage to acknowledge. That's what we need to communicate, that it takes courage to acknowledge mental health issues and to aggressively, confront them. It takes courage to advocate for that. And I think that's the real message that I want to get out, is that that's what masculinity is all about, is understanding that we are all subject to the human condition, and vulnerability is not a bad thing.
And in your book, I know you talk, and you're starting to talk about it here, you talk about the importance of connection, but also the concept of, brotherhood, of men having, solid, deep friendships, and that actually that can help with your life expectancy. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Support, all the science tells us that your ability to adopt and sustain a healthy lifestyle, right? And all of the benefits that come with that. Let me just point out that longevity, right? Reduced risk of disease, right? Happiness, fun, those are all byproducts of a healthy lifestyle. So that's number one. Number two is that anytime we can partner with others, whether it be a spouse, loved ones, adult children, or social friends, if we can incorporate them into those habits, routines, and rituals that I mentioned before, a gym buddy, for example, I've written about that, you increase the chances of sustaining those healthy behaviors because now you've got somebody to pick you up when you're maybe not feeling like getting out of bed and go to the gym in the morning. And you've got somebody to encourage you. You've got also then somebody that you can confide in perhaps and take the physical dimensions of your relationship into, something that can help your mental health because, that's important. Like, hey, how you doing? Or, I'm struggling with an issue or whatever. There's so much that can be gleaned from relationships that are, beyond just the spousal or the significant other, the romantic relationships, with other men. And also, what I, utilize a lot of what I call intergenerational relationships. I have two adult boys now. We have the best times. We socialize, we do things together. And that really is a source of motivation for me.
And as you were saying earlier, there's a kind of responsibility for older men to act as role models to younger men. So I guess this concept of, intergenerational connections is really important. And perhaps, would you say missing or has got lost over recent generations?
Well, I don't think it's gotten totally lost because we love our children, we love our families, but we need to realize that when it comes to healthy behaviors, guys, it's not all about us, right? There are people out there that care about our sorry butts, right? Believe it or not, they do give a damn about our well-being and they want us around as long as possible. And not only do they want us around, but they want us to be healthy enough to be engaged. Philip, in the United States and somewhat around the world, particularly in the US, there's a growing gap between our lifespan and our health span, right? Our health span is the number of years we live in a healthy state and have what I call functional fitness. We have the wherewithal to go out and, frolic on the beach or take a vacation or just go out to dinner, whatever, right? That gap in the US is growing tremendously. And so while we're living longer, the quality of life is not there. And so that's coming back to your point about intergenerational and other relationships. When you have the purpose and you have the meaning, then that gives you additional reasons, if you will, to stick to the diet. But that I find that the other guys and adult children and things can really be a source of inspiration and helps you get out of bed, get to the gym, put down the third donut, that type of thing.
And what about, loneliness? Loneliness can be a big problem, especially, when you're older. For example, your friends from when you were younger, they might have kind of dropped by the wayside and you've been focused on other things. Or you just don't have a network, a male network. How do you go about finding one? How do to try and achieve the things you're saying? Have more fulfillment in life, have buddies. But what if you're living quite a solitary lifestyle, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, great question. Here in the U.S., loneliness has literally been declared a public health crisis and an emergency because it disproportionately affects older individuals. So it is a real important factor. And then when you overlay sort of the male personality, which is not compared to women, not as inclined to go out and meet people and strike up conversations, we kind of keep to ourselves. It's double trouble, right? So Philip, what we need to do is sort of, in the most basic terms, suck it up a little bit and kind of, it's almost like, as one who has been married, divorced, and understands what it's like. It was a long time ago now, but it's not easy to date. Well, it's not easy to make friends, just to make guy friends, but there are ways to do that. You've got to put yourself in a position. You're not going to bars and pubs and stuff, but whether it be volunteer activities, whether it be sports, whether it be going online a little bit, there are a number of ways. Again, it's not easy. People are not going to run to your doorstep and say, "Oh, let's be friends. Let's go grab a cup of coffee." But there are ways to get engaged, and a number of organizations out there that can help you with that.
So you've described your 60s, which is the decade that you're in now, as your most fulfilling yet, in terms of things like purpose, connection, vitality. So what keeps you motivated?
Well, and yes, and in all full disclosure, I'm now 70. I've migrated out of my 60s.
If I may say so, you do not look 70 years old.
Well, thank you. I do. And well, there you go. I try to practice what I preach, and hopefully, people could be inspired by seeing that, I've got good genes as well. Both my parents were deceased, both lived into their 90s. So I've got some, I'm trying to build on that. But that said, no, I'm loving life. I still work full time. And that provides me with a lot of inspiration. Spend a lot of time with my adult children and now grandchildren, and my spouse and I try to, travel and do things a lot. So it's about being socially engaged because, Philip, one of I included this in a recent TED talk that I recorded. Anticipation is a great motivator, right? We all know that, okay, we've got a big social event coming up. We've got a wedding, or we've got a trip, or we've got something coming up, anniversary, reunion or something. And, you want to look good and you want to feel good. And so you might, just kind of watch yourself and maybe try to trim off a couple of pounds before that wedding or because you want to fit into the tuxedo, whatever it might be. So take that little inkling of an idea and make that, your daily routine. So that if you've got, whether it's having dinner, and a glass of wine with your spouse once a week, or it's, what I call milestone events, again, like a big international travel or a graduation or something. If you have a calendar that's full of social events, you always have something to look forward to. And that anticipation can be a motivator as well. So that's part of what I do. I try to have a pretty active social life, so we've always got something to kind of look forward to.
And what kind of myth, you've talked a bit about it here, but what myth about aging would you, for men, would you like most to kind of erase?
Oh, well, number one, it's never too late to start living healthy, right? There's tons of science. I just wrote about a Canadian study that shows that A, it's never too late. B, that this notion that aging automatically means deteriorating skills and physical functionality. Not true. There's a lot of science out there that says you can sustain a pretty good quality of life and a pretty good, physical activity and cognitive activity as well, which is super important through a healthy lifestyle. So there's a lot of science out there that says it's worth the investment. I talk a lot of times to guys in business terms. In business, it's always about the value proposition. Is what you put in your investment going to yield a return that's worth the investment? And when it comes to diet, exercise, robust social life, good relationships, trust me, the science is there that shows that investment has a great return in terms of quality of life, in terms of fulfillment, in terms of the kind of things that life is all about.
I wanted to ask you about something which you reference in your book about how men can turn, because life doesn't always run to plan. How can men turn some things that have set them back into, fuel for transformation? I think you refer to it as post-traumatic growth.
Yeah. Again, trauma is a horrible thing that too many of us experience in our lives. But what was fascinating to me was that when I did the research on trauma, and most importantly, the development of individuals post-traumatic incident, that more than half, I think the number is, actually flourish. That traumatic event can be a springboard, if you will, to a robust and a higher quality of life. And so, check out the science on that. But it tells us that no matter how challenging the circumstances may be, that there is the possibility of turning that around. And again, that Canadian science that I just mentioned that just came out within the last couple of months also indicated that not only is it never too late, but even if you have not led a healthy lifestyle, if you've been sedentary and kind of neglected your health, that you can turn that around. It's not like, a foregone conclusion that there's no way out. And so there's a lot of factors out there. And look, going back to how we started this conversation, I was in my 30s. I was a single dad. I had a lot to do, but ultimately I was able to this was pure luck in my case. I didn't the logic was I've got these kids. I need to take care of them and I need to be healthy in order to do that. Right. And I kind of stumbled my way into it, but I discovered, the value of it and how well it can make you feel. And it just propelled me. So even the most dire circumstances sometimes, while it doesn't look like there's any light at the end of the tunnel, I would argue that it can be there. You can find it.
And your book, Saving Men from Themselves, where can people find it if they want to follow your work? And then perhaps we could finish on, what are three takeaways from your book that men will get, by reading it?
Well, you can get the book on, you can go to what's called bookbaby.com. It's a publisher here in the US and I can buy it today. You can pre-order it on amazon.com and all of the Barnes & Noble, all of the major platforms here in the US and internationally will have the book. In terms of takeaways, again, I would just repeat what we just said. Number one, it's never, ever, ever too late. The opportunities are there. Some of the studies look at people in their 80s and the people in their 80s that were more active and more physically, fit, just have a more robust social life. Number two is, it's not just about you. It's about your relationships. People, because I think men don't think about that sometimes. Yes, they have the picture of the family on their dresser and they're really think about that, right? They really do care about you. And number three, see your doctor, right? It's not a sign of weakness to get at least an annual physical and go from there. And sometimes it can be scary because there's a lot of literature that suggests that, if I go see the doctor, I might find something that, is frightening. Well, better to find it and deal with it than to ignore it. So those are the three things. See your doctor. It's not about you and it's never too late.
That's great advice, Louis. Thank you very much. Thank you. Because I think, men listening to this, there are lots of useful takeaways there. And we'll put the links to your book as well in the show notes. But thank you very much, Louis, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Philip. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you want to find out more about Louis and his work, visit his website, louisbezich.com. His book, Saving Men from Themselves, 20 Proven Tactics with a New Approach to Living Healthy for Men Over 50, is available to buy on BookBay and through other online retailers, and we'll put all of the links in the show notes. To help raise the profile of the podcast as ever, it really helps if you can either leave a review and or share it through your own networks. And if you have a story, then do contact me through the website mid-lifemen.com.